Hi everybody and welcome to tonight's webinar. Hopefully you can see the slides and hopefully you'll be experienced in using the chat. So if we can use the chat, tell us where in the world you are, what your connection to social work is, and generally how you are. So you'll see from the slides that tonight is our 97th webinar. So we've done quite a lot so far, and if you've been with us all the way through, that's fantastic. If you've just discovered us, that's great too. If you just pop in now and again, that's all right as well. So tonight we're joined by Soyab, who, if some of you have been to one of our other previous webinars, the context session on mental health, it was a panel webinar and Soyab had a little slot in that, 5 or 10 minutes. And because we had so many questions and so many follow-up questions and everybody wanted to know what else Soyab was going to tell us, we invited him back for a whole webinar. So tonight, when I hand over to Siobhan, Siobhan's going to hand over to Soyab, and it's just going to be a continuation from that webinar. So I, for one, am really looking forward to that because I thought, oh, I need to know more. So I'm going to hand over to Siobhan and then we're going to get on with the evening. So over to you, Siobhan.
Fabulous. Thank you, Kelly. I just saw one question in the chat that you probably answered. They probably typed it up literally as you were saying it. Somebody says, do we have access to the recording? And Kai, our amazing team member, sets it all up and sends it onto YouTube tomorrow. So it'll be on YouTube tomorrow. Kai always gets it done really, really quickly. So you'll have access to the recording. I'm not going to talk at all tonight, really. I'm just going to hand straight over to Soyab. And I think, you know, Kelly introduced it really well and said Soyab came and delivered a little bit of what he was doing tonight at our mental health context session. And we wanted to invite him back to do some more. And tonight, because as you all know, we are absolutely on our countdown. We only have 3 webinars left after tonight. So we're going to end on webinar 100. And this is our last webinar led by a guest. I love these webinars because I can just sit back, take some notes. I get loads of learning from them. I can join you in the chat, which I can't normally do. So I love these sessions. But tonight is our final guest-led session. And I'm so pleased that it's Soyab that's leading the session tonight, because actually I think what Soyab's put together for us is it really encompasses everything that we've tried to do in these webinars all along. So Soyab's going to be bringing some theory in. There's lots of aspects around values and anti-oppressive practice. And this is something that Soyab has developed himself as a practitioner. We've had some great academics come and join us in the webinars, but we really like these webinars to be based on social work practice. And so Soyab is bringing us something which he has developed based on practice. And so I'm just going to hand straight over to you. So, oh, and I don't know if you want me to tell people, but we won't be running late tonight because it's the Liverpool match and you want to get off to that later. So, you know, I don't know if that'll go on YouTube or not, but so timings will be great tonight for everybody. All right. So I'm handing straight over to you, Soyab. Thanks ever so much.
Thank you, Siobhan. I think you guys have beat me far too much there. So I'm really humbled to be here. So thank you for that. I think I come to these sessions more on a selfish basis, really, so I can learn from you guys. So I'm really keen on the feedback I get to be corrected on something if I've not kind of said it properly, or if I've used some kind of text or anything, or if there's other kind of models that may help me really in my practice as well. So thank you for that. And I do hope you will get something out of it. So we'll see how it goes. And yeah, the football match starts at 8 o'clock. It's Liverpool match, but I'll try not to rush too much for that. So as I was putting this together, actually, I thought I usually call it the medical model versus the spiritual model. But I'm actually wondering whether we should call it the spiritual model versus the medical model, because I think my view has been that we should be considering someone's spiritual needs before the medical needs in terms of mental health. But that's something we'll kind of explore as we're going along. So I think it's really important just for me to kind of say how the model came about and my journey around that, really. So I've predominantly worked within areas where there's been a large South Asian community, and usually the Muslim community as well. So apologies, my kind of focus will be around South Asian Muslim community. I'm not trying to preach you in terms of religion or anything like that. That is naturally just the areas I've worked in. So there's been a huge influence around religion, culture, and language as well in terms of mental health. So those three kind of aspects really kind of come about when I've been practicing as a mental health social worker. So in terms of historical work, when I left school, my careers teacher looked into the crystal ball and said, Shoaib, you're business minded, you need to go into something to do with business. So I actually went to uni and did transport logistics management. I did the course, finished it. I went to a career in that. I think I lasted a week, then I quit. And my mom and dad were furious with me for doing that. And after that, I did kind of go off the rails a little bit, I suppose, but I think that really helped me in terms of me kind of connecting with the individuals I work with, especially the young people. But that's for a different session, I suppose. One of the first jobs I got was working as an interpreter, which led on for me to kind of work as a bilingual community care officer. So again, I was picking up mostly male South Asian service users. Really interesting there again, where I think I was one of the first male workers in mental health, South Asian as well. And I think there's still a lack of male social workers in social work. So there's a real need for that, and a diverse social workforce as well that's still needed. So continue kind of promoting social work to your friends, family, because we need that kind of diverse social work to represent the communities and the individuals we kind of serve as well. I've done some serious judgment reviews, and I found those really interesting. And when I've done those, I've again kind of picked out a lot of issues around diversity, culture, people's understanding of mental health, professionals' perception of certain individuals, and the real focus on the medical model that seems to kind of come through the theme as well. So I really enjoyed doing serious judgment reviews, and if you don't do them, I'd kind of really kind of emphasize people to join in and pick up that kind of work if you're able to within the service you work in. One of the kind of key kind of points for me was there was a very serious incident in the area that I worked in, and then there was a serious judgment review, and some outcomes came up from that. And one of the outcomes that came from that was that this South Asian woman had died, and her children had died as well. I'm not going to give you too many details in terms of what happened. But one of the recommendations that came out was that there was a lack of understanding from professionals around the need for this individual that was from a South Asian background, and she didn't speak English either, and there was a lack of understanding around using interpreters and her supporting her in terms of understanding mental health from the medical kind of or Western perspective as well. So they decided to set up a transcultural team, and I was part of that. So I was really excited when that was first set up. And some of the work we did was around, we did a lot of community work and build that awareness. I think one of the things I really emphasize is that we kind of really want to teach our workforce around understanding culture, religion, and bring that kind of spirituality awareness to them. But we also need to make sure that the communities we work with understand the mental health model as well and the medical model. So we did that kind of two-pronged effects. We were kind of raising that education, doing the educational work with the community, and we were doing the educational work with our staff as well in terms of teaching them around diversity and culture and running some diversity training sessions. We created some really strong links with our chaplaincy service, because that's an in-house service that provides spiritual support. So we were really keen to do that. We did some work with GPs and the local mosques and the local community centers as well. Again, just creating those links and that awareness around mental health. And we did quite a huge recruitment push as well in terms of trying to recruit South Asian staff that speak the same language and understand that kind of cultural and religious perspective of mental health, and a workforce that represents the community we kind of serve as well. We did a lot of work with the drug services as well, because one of the things the local drug services at that time were saying to us was that they were getting no referrals from the South Asian community at all. Although we were aware there was a big problem around drug use within the local community, because a lot of the mental health referrals that were coming in, there was element of drug use going on, especially within within the younger group. So we did a lot of work with the local drug services as well in terms of their understanding around culture diversity and the probable kind of barriers that might be preventing South Asian service patients or service users to access services. In terms of some recent work, we've kind of continued that recruitment work and try and have teams that mirror the community we serve. We've done loads of work in schools, that early intervention work, making sure young people understand mental health and pick up on any kind of early signs around mental health as well. Internally, we've set up equality inclusion forums. We've done a lot of research. We have that evidence base as well. Has seminars, involved a lot of senior staff because they have the influence. We've kind of embedded understanding and implemented kind of that spiritual element of care within equality strategies and within our internal networks as well, and within staff awareness and with our medics as well. So I think one of the things I find with our social workers that work in non-local authority organizations and specifically in NHS is that they can sometimes lose their social work identity, and they can very much become focused on the medical model. And one of the things I really try and emphasize is that if you're working in an MDT setting, if you're the only social worker in that MDT meeting, what you need to be doing is representing that kind of social work theory model, social inclusion and all that kind of stuff. So kind of putting that slant within that kind of discussion when they're talking about what interventions need to take place. And that continue work with the chaplaincy service as well. So where this came about even stronger was when I worked with the early intervention team. So it's first episode psychosis, where they work with individuals from the age of 14 plus. So they're experiencing kind of the first episode of psychosis. And what we found again was, obviously psychosis, you're dealing with some symptoms around hearing voices and having delusions or seeing things that are not there. And again, we found that some individuals were saying that those experiences were due to either jinn possession, black magic, or something supernatural going on, which was not within kind of the medical model. So that was kind of coming across really strongly when I started working in that team. So we really wanted to focus on that spiritual element of care within that team. Okay, so to start with, again, like I said, this session is really interesting when it's interactive. So I really enjoyed doing this as an interactive session. We just don't have time, unfortunately, either. But I think one of the kind of questions I want to pose to you guys is your understanding around what is jinn, what is black magic, and do you kind of even believe in those kind of things? Because that has a huge influence when we do work with individuals that say to us that they think their voices are due to jinn or black magic. And is it a mental disorder or a disability? And should faith healing be provided instead of medication? So just a few seconds kind of reflect on those points, just to let you get that into the chat, because I think I'd be really interested to see what the views of the audience is on that. I find it really interesting when, again, when I'm doing this face-to-face, when there's individuals in the audience that have no beliefs around any of these aspects, and by the end of the session, they're really fascinated with the subject, and I've created that interest. And I think that's the whole reason for doing these sessions really as well.
I think people are really unsure what it means, Soyeb. So we've got very little in the chat other than, is jinn about demons? Jinns are creatures that not everyone can see, who can hurt us physically and mentally. Evil spirits, mischievous spirits. We've got people who saying, I do believe in this. I was born and raised in Africa and it's a thing. Got like an imp. And then people saying not heard of jinn. So mischievous spirit seems to be the one that's coming up more than others.
I think my mum would call me that. I'm a mischievous spirit. No, that's fine. So we've got both spectrums there, so that's really good. So we've got an audience that kind of have some understanding or some beliefs around this, and maybe some in the audience that are probably thinking, what is this guy on about? Who have we got as a speaker today? So that's really good. So in terms of what is jinn, again, it's really hard, but remember, I'm doing this from a South Asian Muslim perspective, and also understand that there's different sects of Muslim and South Asian communities as well, because there's lots of different beliefs around it. So I'm specifically targeting this in terms of the community I work in and their understanding of jinn and black magic. Okay. So in terms of jinn, the actual word jinn is Arabic, which means to be concealed from sight. The jinn can be seen and heard by the one who is possessed, which according to medical model would be classed as a delusion or hallucination. And jinn is part of many belief systems as well. And other religions may know jinns as devils, evils, and evil spirits. I think one of the important things to understand there as well, especially where I work, was jinn is mentioned in the Quran as well. So if a Muslim says to me that they think that's they're possessed by jinn or jinn is real, that is part of their belief system. So for me to actually say to them that no, there's no such thing as a jinn, or for me to say that, I would be actually saying something against Islam or my beliefs, because it's actually mentioned in the Quran. So when somebody says the word jinn, I have to almost, well, I do have to believe that there is a jinn. But in one context, to say that is kind of the question then I would be raising. Okay, but I think it's really important to kind of bear that in mind when you're working with individuals from certain backgrounds or religions and cultures, because that would be a fundamental part of their belief system as well. So in terms of black magic, traditionally black magic is applied to magic that is done in a negative manner. This can include, but not limited to, magical workings that impact the free will of others, magic performed to bring about destruction or harm, such as cursing or hexing. So usually black magic is thought to be something that is done negatively to either harm somebody or bring harm to them in some manner. And I think black magic is within some religions, but I think the aspect of black magic is much more strongly founded on the cultural aspect than religion. And that's again really important to kind of remember, because we need to differentiate between what is a cultural belief and what's a religious belief. And sometimes people confuse and think that a cultural belief is actually a religious belief. So it's really important to bear that in mind as well. And sometimes that's the kind of tact I use when I'm trying to challenge somebody in terms of their beliefs around mental health and jinn and stuff like that as well, and black magic. So again, just a point of reflection. We know there's inequalities in mental health. So I know I've got something there from mine, which is from 2020, but just yesterday, the NHS benchmarking survey came out, and that kind of talks about some very inequalities in mental health care provision. Black people represent 3% of the adult population in the UK, but 5% of the community mental health service users, and 8% of people admitted to mental health hospitals, and 12% of those are detained in hospital, rising to 19% of those in medium secure bed. So that trend is not changing. So we're still kind of experiencing that inequality, and nobody seems to be able to address that or get to the bottom of that. So that is still not going on. So really important to kind of reflect on that as well in terms of the stats that are still coming out. So in terms of the history of mental health treatment, so early communities widely believed that mental illness was the result of supernatural phenomena, such as spiritual or demonic possession, sorcery, the evil eye, or an angry deity, and so responded with equally mystical and sometimes brutal treatments. So trephining was used, where they would drill a hole in the skull, believing that that hole in the skull would then allow any evil spirits to come out. So that was something that was used very early on. Some religious sects believe that illnesses were attributed to God's wrath, and along the same spiritual lines, Asian Persians attributed illness to demons and believed that good health could be achieved through proper precautions to prevent and protect one from diseases. This included adequate hygiene and purity of the mind and body achieved through good deeds and thoughts. So in all of these ancient civilizations, mental illness was attributed to some supernatural force, generally a displeased deity. Widespread use of exorcism and prayer, music was used, and therapy to affect emotion, and the singing of charms and spells were performed by Babylonia, Assyria, the Mediterranean, Near East, and Egypt in hope of achieving a cure. So historically, people have always used some kind of spiritual source to cure mental illness, and they've always thought mental illness was very closely linked to spirituality as well. So historically, that's been there. So again, really important to remember that. So in terms of what policies I've worked through, so I was going to take these out because they're quite old, but I thought it's really important to again see the journey, because I think I've got a colleague that works in the equality team, and I worked with him right from the beginning when I said I used to be an interpreter. And one of the things we always talk about is how things go around in a circle and nothing seems to get resolved. So some of the stuff we used to talk about 20, 25 years ago, we're still talking about again. So I think it's really, so I kind of left these in, so it just gives you that kind of understanding of historically how issues around this have tried to be tackled through policy and legislation, but we've just never achieved it. So Department of Health delivering race equality, which was 2005, and New Horizon towards a shared vision of mental health consultation, which was 2009, emphasized the need for considering people's diverse needs, and the care program policy, which was 2011, states that care planning should view a person holistically, seeing and supporting their diverse needs. So again, I should have put a reflective point there. Do we do that in our care plans? So again, and this isn't just mental health. I think I do a very similar session for individuals that work in children's services, for example, because when you look at cases like Victoria Kalimbi, there were elements of spirituality and the reason why she was being abused linked to these kind of issues as well. So I think it's really important. Do we kind of consider someone's spirituality, culture, religion when we're developing care plans and putting action plans in place? And again, I think that's a really important element of someone that we do need to consider when we're undertaking assessments, and then when we're putting an action plan or care plan in place. But again, there was no mention of faith healing within that context either. So really all case law, which probably has been updated and changed, but I thought again, I'm going to leave it in. So case law from 1979 stated that there needed to be a true mental disorder, not just behavior deviating from society's norms. So again, I've said I work in a community where there's where there used to be, and there still continues to be, but much more stronger previously, beliefs around mental health was linked to black magic and jinn possession. So that was the kind of the society's normal belief system. So if they were saying that, is that a true mental disorder? And again, that kind of brings those kind of questions in. The Code of Practice from 2008 highlighted that no one should be deemed to have a mental disorder due to their religious and cultural beliefs being different. So again, the question posed, so our beliefs around jinn and black magic cannot fall under mental health. So is it mental health, or is it just beliefs that people have and is within the society's normal belief system? So why are we saying that they've got mental health issues? Human Rights Act, Article 9, freedom of thought, conscience and religion. Everyone has the right to freedom of thought, conscience and religion. The right includes freedom to change his religion or belief, and freedom, either alone or in the community with others, and in public or private, to manifest his religion or belief in worship, teaching, practice, and observance. So again, does that clash with us saying to somebody that their belief around jinn, which is related to their religious beliefs, is not accurate? So again, the Human Rights Act comes into play there as well. Guiding principles, we need to recognize diverse needs, religion and culture, take into account views and wishes of patients and family. Patients must be involved in planning and reviewing of care and use resources available to patients. And I think that's again a really key one in terms of using the resources available to patients. And again, I think as social workers and as practitioners, we don't always do that. I think it's really, if we're going to empower the people we work with, we need to understand what are the resources they've got around them. So are they linked to a church, a mosque, community centre? What's the family network like? And have we got resources within that community that we can actually use to support them with the symptoms that they might be presenting with, whether they're the symptoms of a mental disorder or symptoms of some jinn possession or black magic, but is there resources we can use from within that community that the patient or the service user already has? some more kind of policies and stuff, and you'll understand where I'm coming from when I'm kind of really mentioning policies and legislation and stuff towards the end. But Section 3 of the Mental Health Act states that appropriate medical treatment should be available. So if somebody goes into hospital on a section and they're saying that they've been possessed by a jinn or black magic, should we be getting an exorcist in to do an exorcism? It's very, very unlikely that's ever going to happen. But the question is posed then. However, is appropriate treatment available to treat jinn possession, black magic, or even spiritual treatment? And DRE states that by 2010, services will provide a range of therapies which are culturally appropriate and effective. And that was from 2010. And I again posed the kind of a reflective question again, are we providing a range of therapies which are culturally appropriate and effective? My view is that we're still not doing it. I don't know what other people think. So in terms of appropriate treatment, to be appropriate, the treatment must attempt to address aspects of the mental disorder from which the patient is suffering. And it's changed slightly now. So it now talks about limbs 1, 2, and 3. So treatment of patient's core disorder. But again, you can kind of go back if someone is saying that their mental illness is related to spirituality or religion or culture, then is that the core disorder that's talking about? And should we be addressing that core element of what they think their symptoms are linked to? And if someone is suffering from symptoms of jinn or black magic, do we have treatment available to deal with this aspect of disorder? If not, can we use the Mental Health Act? And that does cause a bit of a dilemma, especially for me as an AMP as well. So again, from 2019, according to statistics from NHS digital use by the review in 2017-18, black British people were over 4 times more likely to be detained under the Act than white people. And again, I've just given you some statistics early on that still pretty much says that the end goal should be for health professionals to have the skills and confidence to assess and effectively respond to the needs of the individual that is in front of you, whomever they may be. And again, he talks about the health profession to have the skills. And I think we did a piece of research, I think a couple of years ago it was now, to see what the professionals' understanding of spirituality was. So we asked a range of different professionals, what is spirituality? And would you ask, when you're undertaking an assessment, would you actually ask anything around spirituality? And pretty much the answer came back as no. So how can we develop those skills if we're not even asking those questions? And if you look at collective experience, we know that by large mental health services are not taking into account the cultural needs of people from different ethnicities. So just to bring it back a little bit, some points as well. So in terms of a default position, sometimes in my experience, again, what I found is people will attribute things to jinn because it's easier to blame the jinn rather than a true issue. So a lot of the cases that I've worked with in terms of mental health, you go and see a young person and they're presenting as really chaotic and they're hallucinating and they're delusional, and the family pretty much know that it's due to some other kind of aspects, such as, for example, it might be drug use, so they're reacting to some drugs or something like that. But it's easy for them to blame jinn or black magic and say, actually, it's the jinn that's causing those symptoms, or it's the jinn that's making them take drugs, or it's because of black magic that's controlling them and that's making them do things. And I think it's easier for families to blame something else other than that individual or their own son or their own daughter as well. And I think the other aspect around this as well is it's really difficult to, if you believe in faith healers, it's really difficult to find authentic faith healers because there's no course. So you can't go on a course at the local university and learn how to do an exorcism or give somebody kind of palms or whatever, because there is no course. And these faith healers, there's no kind of registration. They don't have to register with anybody to say that they're registered faith healer. So I could pretend, I could set up as a faith healer myself tomorrow. I'd probably earn a lot more money than I do now, because they do genuinely charge thousands of pounds, and people will pay when you've got your own son or your own daughter, or a close loved one presenting with certain symptoms, and you're trying to find a solution for them, you will pay whatever it takes. To if somebody says to this might benefit them, you will do it. And I've seen people do it. I've seen people spend thousands of pounds, and it's really frustrating from my point of view when that happens as well. And it's really, and when you speak to faith healers, genuine faith healers, again, if you believe in them, they will say to you, actually, Shoaib, it's really difficult to differentiate whether those symptoms of mental health are actually due to mental health, or are they due to some kind of other things such as black magic or jinn possession, and they can appear very much like epilepsy and things like that as well. So actually it's quite difficult to kind of diagnose and treat those things as well. We ran a really interesting seminar on this subject a couple of years ago, and we had a psychologist that came, and their team actually provides spiritual therapy. And one of the things he said was that it's really strange that most of the referrals they get are from the South Asian community. And he was saying, is it because the jinns are racist, because they seem to target South Asian communities more than other kind of communities as well? But I think that was just because we were talking generally within our community, but that was really interesting point he was making. And I think that goes back to that first point, where I think in some cultures that everything is then attributed to jinn. So whatever happens, if your car breaks down, is because someone's done black magic on it. So people can get into that mindset as well. I've been clearly told I can't tell you any case study. Siobhan's told me to kind of stay tight about giving you any too much details, but I've got some really interesting cases which I love talking about, and this is where it brings it to life, to be honest. But I think absolutely, I think because this is going to be on YouTube and stuff as well. But what I would say is, having worked in mental health for nearly 25 years, and because I believe in jinns and black magic because of my background, my religion as well, there's probably been two cases where I'm almost 99%, I would say that there was elements of jinn or black magic involved. And if I told you why, you would probably kind of, this is where it gets really interesting, where the audience, I'll have a couple of audience members that I'll kind of sit there and go, there's no such thing as jinns or black magic. And then I'll give them this case that I've worked with. And it's actually a case I use at job interviews all the time. And it gets me the job every time. It gets me the job because it's such an interesting case, because it's got everything in it, safeguarding and, discrimination, prejudice and legislation. It's got everything in it. It's a really interesting case. But if you want to know more, you'd have to get in touch with me, I suppose. And I can tell you that one day. But like I said, I suppose what I can say from that point of view as well is that it's very rare that I've come across, it's very rare that I would say genuinely that those mental health symptoms have been due to jinn possession, black magic. I think 80-90% of the time it has just been mental health symptoms, and we've had to do a lot of work with those families, kind of persuade them to go down the medical model rather than the spiritual model. And I think in terms of those cases, I think there is some element there that when someone is convinced that the only treatment that's going to work for them is the spiritual treatment, then something, that's the only thing that's going to work for them. You can pump them with as much medication as you want. They will still have some element of doubt or some element of those symptoms remaining. So until you support them in going down that route in a safe manner, it's going to be really hard to shift their kind of mindset that those symptoms have gone. So I think that's something we have to remember, and I think we all like that. That psychological kind of impact something has is really important, and no amount of medication can take that away as well. So in terms of research, because I'm fascinated by this subject, as you probably guessed, and I think when I did my AMP training, I'm a social work training, I did assignments on this, and I tried to find loads of research, and actually there might be now, but at that time there wasn't much research I found that was in the UK, but some research I did find. So in terms of a woman diagnosed with psychosis and depression, the consultant recommended a spiritual consultation as well as a psychiatric evaluation. After spiritual needs were considered, she was much more receptive to psychological intervention. After treatment, she engaged more and did not feel either diagnosis of schizophrenia or depression. The study also felt that in many cases, religion succeeds much more in bringing relief to those who seek psychotherapeutic intervention, something we just talked about now. So by offering belief-based healing alongside medical treatment can have profound benefits. When people feel that the belief systems are not threatened, they're more receptive to psychological interventions. And that's the other thing. If people feel that and which is why I think it's really important to mirror the workforce with the communities you kind of serve. So as soon as somebody that has beliefs around jinn possession, black magic, sees someone like me going to do an assessment, straight away you can see that relief there, that they're when they start talking about jinns and black magic, I am to some extent going to believe them. And I think that's a really important aspect when you're trying to build rapport. And if you go in and totally dismiss their belief system, that rapport is just not going to happen. And you're not going to succeed in any manner with that individual. So I think that is really important thing to remember as well. And again, another one, spirit possession and exorcism in the treatment of a Bedouin psychiatric patient who was diagnosed as paranoid schizophrenic. The patient was prescribed medication, but hallucinations continued. The social worker and the family went to see a dervish, a traditional healer. The dervish carried out an exorcism and the patient's voices and images disappeared. The family and the social worker agreed that the patient should remain under supervision of both the dervish and the social worker to enable continuing treatment by both of them. So again, that kind of balance of using both the medical model and the spiritual model is really important. And in conclusion, they write that it is possible and beneficial for practitioners to be involved in both systems and act as a broker between the two, and how important it is to know the patient and their background. I think the key problem here we've got is the broker bit, where if you've got spiritual healers, like I said earlier, that are not have no supervision from any professional body, how can you become that broker, and how can you justify using someone that is not within any kind of medical model or spiritual model that we work with, or that Western medical model we work in? So research around faith healing found 94.7% of patients felt that they should have opted for medical treatment earlier for faster improvement, or at least should have continued both faith healing and medicinal treatment. So again, and I've seen this again, where once you kind of allow somebody to go down the spiritual model and the symptoms remain, they will then naturally turn back to the medical model, because they will then believe that it's actually something medical that's going on. In a local area where I work, they actually set up a specific team to offer that kind of faith healing element. And when I spoke to them, they've actually closed down now because the lack of referrals they're getting. So initially there was a massive high referral rate that they were getting, but what they found was once they started talking to these individuals and offering them some element of faith healing and doing the educational work, 80-90% of them were then just going down the medical model, because they understood that is what was needed than the spiritual model. So again, I think that educational work is really important as well. So the symptoms of jinn and black magic can manifest similar to that common mental disorders and disabilities such as epilepsy and psychosis. It seems very difficult to dismiss medical treatment for those patients who claim to have been possessed by jinn, black magic, as they present with symptoms of disorder or disability of the mind. And Sheikh writes, symptoms attributed to possession by jinn are commonly manifestations of a mental disorder. So I think we can see that balance needs to be found. Do you like that clip, by the way, that seesaw? That's the best I could do from all the slides. That was my kind of highlight of all the slides. A balance needs to be found so that the degree of the mental disorder is controlled through psychiatry, medication, but alongside this, the patient should be able to use faith healing and spiritual treatment. And religion can play a central part in the lives of social work clients at a number of levels, and therefore needs to be taken into account. And that's the famous Thompson that I used to use all the time in my assignments when I was becoming a social worker. But again, that element, again, what I said earlier in terms of considering someone's religion and culture, whilst we're doing assessments, whilst we're implementing the care plans, is key again. Yasin and Lahir write, the medication will help alleviate mental symptoms, but will not effectively treat the cause, and therefore an understanding of diverse belief systems is imperative. One is to holistically and effectively prescribe treatments to individuals from non-Western cultures. And again, one of the key points there is having an understanding of the diverse belief systems. So again, the community we serve, what are the diverse belief systems in that community we're working in, and for us to kind of get skilled up and gain that knowledge in understanding people's belief systems, culture, religion, their perspective around child protection, mental health, safeguarding is really important if you're going to have that kind of key interventions. And No Health Without Mental Health states that inequalities arise in mental health in relation to religion or belief in four main ways. One being that the core beliefs which form their identity are overlooked. This can cause anxiety and poor recovery. Again, something we've talked about, but it's just been said in a different way. But again, that core belief system that people have around culture, religion, or any other belief system, and if you don't kind of consider that, it's just going to cause anxiety, and that recovery rate is just not going to happen. Interestingly, religion can be a protective factor and reduce risks. So Wiseman say that those with greater spirituality have better self-esteem, less drug and alcohol abuse, less sexual permissiveness, and suicide as well. And that's something I've seen in the South Asian community as well, in terms of the risk around suicide seems to be a lot less, although that is changing actually now as well. And we're trying to look out for the pattern for that, because the suicide rate within men and within the Muslim community actually is slightly going up, which is slightly concerning. Fernando writes that in his experience, there is a demand from service users that disciplines of psychiatry and psychology should include a spiritual dimension in services offered. Fernando is a really interesting author, worth reading his books. And Repa and Perkin write that understanding and empathy are vital in forming effective relationships. And in order to do this, mental health workers must be willing to discuss the experiences of those they work with. And again, it can be really uncomfortable, just like it's uncomfortable to talk about prejudice, our kind of any discriminatory views we might have. And it's just as uncomfortable to talk to someone about the subject around jinn possession, black magic, especially if we have no understanding or around that as well. But those discussions need to be had. Back to this is just to give me a break. I think I put these reflective slides in after I could shut up for a few minutes, but it's just not happening. But again, just going back to inequality, I know I keep bringing this back, but I think this aspect around inequalities in mental health is really important to me, because like I said, 25 years and I still see the inequalities. The statistics are still saying the same things, even though on paper we're saying that we're doing things differently and we are addressing the inequalities. I just struggle to understand, are we really addressing the inequalities? I'm still not sure, and I'd love to see some comments around that in the chat as well, actually, what other people's views on that is as well. I love PCFs. Does everybody love PCFs? And again, this subject area, I talk about it with my students all the time. They probably get sick of listening to me about this. But it covers probably every single aspect of PCF from PCF 1 to 9. So I think it's a really interesting area to kind of explore and look at when you're on placements, or where you're doing your ASYE, or even just if you're working, because it kind of links into your professional standards as well. And I think it's really interesting to kind of reflect on these for your have you all done your re-registration? Is next month. So if you've not done it, you might be able to use this session and link it back to professional standards and think about and reflect on it. Really, I think it's a really interesting subject area to think about and do that peer reflection around as well. I saw this on Twitter, which I thought was really good. I don't know if anybody else has seen it. I only saw it yesterday and I put the slides straight in. But it links in what we're talking about, having that empathy lens, what I've just talked about in terms of understanding someone's background and religion and culture and their perspective of safeguarding, child protection, mental health, and all the other kind of what I call the Western medical perspectives that we have. We have to remember, through someone else's lens, they might not understand the same concept, and they might not even use the same terminology and stuff. So I think it's really important to put those empathy lens on so that we get that understanding. I've not looked at all this, but I just found some of the comments and they're really interesting. So it's probably worth someone looking at that later on. Right. Okay. So this is purely thanks to Student Connect and Siobhan, to be honest, that when I came for the 10-minute session, and this is usually a full day session I do on all these slides. And when I was given 10 minutes last time, I thought I need to put all these slides into one slide, which is why I put this together. But thanks to Siobhan, I think, like she said, it's almost like a model in itself. So, so I'm just to finish off, I'm just gonna go through it really, if that's okay for everyone. So in terms of the first aspect, the individual's culture that we need to think about, so their understanding of mental health, medication, and their cultural acceptance of this. Is there any cultural stigma to address around mental health? Because that stigma still exists. Does the individual understand simple terms like depression? Because in some cultures and religions, and in some kind of communities, the word depression means different things. So I think that terminology is really important. Do they actually know what this means? If English is not their first language, is there a direct word within their language that can interpret the word depression, or does it need to be explained? Because again, when I've used interpreters, they've just interpreted the word depression as sad. Actually, depression doesn't mean sad. And to explain what depression means in certain languages like Gujarati and Urdu, you have to actually do probably a full paragraph just to translate that word depression. Understanding someone's diversity is really important. So due to the individual's religious beliefs, they may feel that all good and bad comes from God, and therefore it needs to be accepted and no support is needed. So does some work need to be undertaken around this? Does a chaplain need to be involved or for spiritual support? What are the parents and families' understanding of mental health? What is the professional's knowledge and understanding of excess interpretation of mental health, which may be based on religion, culture, etc. as well. Something I probably forgot to say earlier is, I think one of the things I found when I used to work in early intervention team, so it was supposed to be the early intervention team. So we'd get a referral in to say, this is first episode psychosis, this person is presenting with voices for the first time. And when we kind of made those links and build that rapport with someone, they tell us that they've been accessing spiritual treatment for the last 7, 8, 9 years. So actually it's not first episode at all. It's not early intervention. Those symptoms are now chronic almost. So it's really difficult to do that early intervention work. So I think, which is why it's really important to get a grasp of these things on both sides, from the service user side, from the referrer side, but also from our side, because if we're going to do the early intervention work, we really need to get a grasp of all this so that we can actually do the early intervention work. And I think that goes same for, again, whether you work in child protection, safeguarding, whatever you work in. I think to get a grasp of all this will allow us to do the early intervention. Otherwise, we're just going to miss it. So considering someone's identity, someone's spirituality is really important. This can be a huge part of someone's inner resource that can aid and speed up recovery. It can help reduce risk and give someone that motivation, strength, resilience, and determination to continue recovering. So I think I've said this before in terms of the wise man's quote. I think taking a step back is really important. So checking on your own unconscious bias, stereotypes, prejudices, and own privileges, which may cloud or impact on understanding someone's needs. This can be a challenge for many of us, especially if we are not religious or very spiritual, and hence our ability to relate to some of these belief systems may be hindered. I think I may have said this last time, but one of the things I've recently found is I was getting really frustrated when I was going into assess people or individuals from the South Asian background, and they started talking about black magic and jinn possession, and I found myself getting really frustrated and almost angry. And when I took that step back, one of the things I realized that when I first came into mental health, my understanding of mental health was purely based on my upbringing. And when I traveled to places like India, Pakistan, and South Asian countries, what I'd seen around mental health as well, then I had the privilege of doing a social work course, my AMP course, my BIA course, which then gave me that kind of medical perspective as well, which was then, that privilege was then having an impact on me fully relating to someone who's not had that privilege. And they were purely kind of basing their understanding of mental health on culture or religion as well. So I think it's really important to do that, kind of take a step back, especially when you're dealing with issues like this. And consider if you have equal access to service for individuals from diverse range of backgrounds. So are you as a service organization able to meet the spiritual needs? Do we have interpreters on hand? Do we have access to religious spiritual advice? Do we have links with local places of worship? And is there cohesion around mental health awareness and education? Because I think that equal access to services is still not there. It's a very simple thing. Actually, recently, one of my students actually picked up on this, where we had a traveler community set up near one of our bases, and she was speaking to one of them, and they were talking about the issues they face around mental health, and they actually can't access services in our local area because they're not registered with the GP. And if you're going to access mental health services, you have to be registered with the GP to be able to come to us. So their access to services is hindered straight away. And other simple things like crisis teams or crisis phone calls, I'll often put in care plans to say, or ring Samaritans or the out of hours crisis team. And then I'm thinking, actually, why have I even bothered putting this down? Because the person I'm working with does actually speak English, or they only use sign language, for example. So how are they going to actually ring the crisis team? So I think that equal access services is way far away, I think, from even being there, even though I think we're told every day that we are. So as professionals, we need to work within a framework that supports safe practice within our professional standards, consider authentic and verified research, policies, procedures, and legislation. This is where it comes back in terms of all that stuff I've babbled on about earlier in terms of legislation policy. I think it's really important as social workers. We have to remember we're a professional identity individual, and we have to work within the realms of the medical model or the social model or the service we work in, the local authorities we work in, or the NHS organization we work in. So we have to back up anything with any of our interventions with that evidence base, whether you kind of link that to research policy. So which is why I often will use the NHS chaplaincy service, because it's an internal service. And if I can refer somebody that's presenting with jinn possession, black magic to the chaplaincy service, where a Muslim imam or a priest will get involved, they can actually support them in accessing that spiritual support. And it's a pathway that's already within our service. So it's really important to be conscious of that, not put yourselves at risk, or you won't need to register next month in terms of your social work registration, because you lose it very quickly. So in summary, using evidence-based research, we're able to consider someone's spiritual needs alongside the traditional medical model interventions. Study undertaken states that in many cases, religion succeeds much more in bringing relief to those who seek psychotherapeutic interventions. And it is possible and beneficial for practitioners to be involved in both systems and act as a broker between the two, and how important it is to know the patient and their background. So those two quotes I think are really important, as I said earlier. And that is it. I've flown through them quicker than I thought I would. Happy to take anything from the chat function if needed.
Thank you so much, Soyeb. I'm going to ask the team to see if they've got anything that they can pick out of the chat quickly now, just while I'm chatting. But one of the things that really struck me, I love your model, as you know. You've some of the people in the chat asking, is this model going to go into theory and practice when I do a new edition? And I'm like, if Soyeb's going to let me, I would like to put it in there. I think having a model of intervention that comes from the variety, the richness of experience that you've got is really important. But I was just struck almost towards the end there when you said, as social workers, we need to consider authentic, verified research along with policies and practices and legislation. And I was just thinking to myself about, there's such a lack of research in this area, and there's almost a fear of doing research in this area, and that's why you're drawing, as you're saying, on references and material that's actually quite old. Some of the students sitting in I'll be like, oh, we wouldn't be allowed to use that in our work because it's out, it's more than 5 years old or whatever. But I think how do we work with this when there is so little there that's available for us? So being able to draw on something that you've shared here, and you've given us really practical guidance, like referring into the NHS chaplaincy service, because as you say, it's already there. It's, you know, it's a service that is you know, part of the systems within which we work. So I think that's really helpful. But just I thought it was great again, and made loads of notes and learned lots of things, and it really just made me reflect on so many different elements around equality and diversity, really. So thank you, really, Soyeb, for sharing what you've shared. I don't know if, I mean, the chat was very busy with lots of people sharing experiences, which we don't always, as you said earlier, don't always want that shared, you know, specifically. So I won't ask people to tell us about some of the particular scenarios that are included in the chat. But was there anything in the chat, team, that you wanted to pull out for Soyeb? I don't want to tell you this, Soyeb, but somebody did put in the chat earlier that actually the Liverpool game started at 7:30, not at 8 o'clock. So you might even still have missed a couple of goals. I don't know. Don't know if you heard any.
Someone's just put it's 1-0. That's the only thing I've seen in the chat.
The only thing seen in the chat is the score. There you go. Okay, well, but we don't know 1-0 to who, so we're going to just leave it at that. We won't find out. Oh, we've got a question in the chat. Can they have your email address? So I don't know, Soyeb, if you're happy to put that into the chat. I think it was on the first slide, actually, wasn't it? But if you wanted to put it into the chat. Dave, you put your hand up. So was there something in the chat that you noticed? I know you're always very busy in the chat.
Just just a common theme that I thought would be really nice to feed back. So yeah, because obviously you were talking about looking at things from an East Asian perspective. I think in the chat tonight there was religions and beliefs and cultures of, well, there always is, like, you know, it's a real melting pot, this webinar. But there was connections made with everyone. Like including myself, like I am Norse pagan by belief, so that is extremely fringe, you know. But even I was making connections to the gin references and the mental health, and there was lots of people in the chat talking about how they related to it and stuff. So I thought there was no specific little themes, but that was one that was connecting, and I thought it would be nice for you to hear, because obviously you're saying like, you were basically apologizing for talking from an East Asian point of view, but you shouldn't. So even though it was specific to that, you were still connecting to everyone. So it was nice, man.
No, thank you for that. And I think that's why it's really important to remember this is just for mental health, whether you're working in child protection or children's services. I think these aspects come into, because I referenced kind of Columbia, and there's a lot more. It's not just Columbia. I think when I did one of the sessions, I think I came across about 10 cases where there were elements of abuse linked to beliefs around gene possession and black magic. So no matter which area you work in, I think it's really important to have a handle on this to some degree, because it does have an impact. But thank you for that, David. Yeah.
Sorry, I was just answering something in the chat there specifically. So, well, Soyeb, I said at the beginning, I was so pleased that you were leading the final guest-led session. Thank you for doing that for us. Just an amazing guest, knew that you would be. And thank you for building on what we've done tonight. Dave, is that next week's link you've just put in the chat? Yes, there you go. It is. I know that I learned a lot tonight, and I know that other people learned a lot tonight. But for our final few webinars, we're actually going to go back to the team. So next week, we're doing a back to basics. Then looking at social work theory again. So we're back to basics with social work theory. But then this is where I'd like everybody that's involved in the chat to please get involved. Soyeb's already done it for us. Webinar number 99, we are hoping to provide 99 pieces of advice. and we've not yet got 99. So anybody who is here in the audience tonight, please do email us. Can some of the team put our email address into the chat? Please do email us if you would like to contribute to webinar number 99, which is the week after next. So it's very soon. And what we'd like to know is if you were to give yourself one piece of advice to your younger social work self, what would it be? Now, for me, it's 32 years since I qualified, so I've got to give myself advice 32 years ago. For some of you who are students, you might want to give yourself advice that you would have given yourself at the start of your course, or if you've been qualified a couple of years, what advice would you have given to yourself? So go back in time a little bit, however short or long that is, and tell us, what piece of advice would you give to yourself then? Looking back now at when I started the course, what advice would I give to myself? Try and do that. If you can send us a photo, something about who you are and something about yourself, we will include them all in webinar number 99. So please do, if you want to see your name, if you want to be involved in webinar 99 and uploaded onto our YouTube channel for our very penultimate webinar, then please do email us on the email address which has gone into the chat, webinars@kirwanmaclean.co.uk. And I suppose I'm saying it out loud just in case anybody just watches back on YouTube, because they might be watching the match, Soyeb, that you want to watch. You don't know who the 1-0 is yet, so we'll leave it to you. Yes, we are on again at the same time next week. We're the same time every week. Melissa, the question there, well, only for another 3 weeks because then we're finishing. But we have been the same time every week for like 2.5 years. So stopping in 3 weeks' time. Okay, fabulous. Thank you very, very much, Soyeb, for being our final guest, leading us through a guest-led webinar. Thanks to everybody for joining, and we'll see you all next week, hopefully. Right, goodbye. Bye.